Hey everybody, this is Amelia, founder of Sisters with Invoices, here with a media coping guide. I know that with the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, right now things are really tough. It's really frightening and depressing and very triggering to watch the image of his body being passed around on the internet, and just thinking about myself like becoming insular. In order to just cope with this, I started to think about the ways in the past that, or methods that can kind of help like process these kinds of occurrences, because they're long-standing. They've been happening for a century, and if people don't realize how long a century is over 100 years. And a century is actually the minimization of how long these acts have truly been, of terror have been happening to people of color, especially African Americans. But lynchings and public displays of lynchings have been a part of our history in this country. And not only have African Americans been lynched, we are the highest lynched, and but Chinese Americans who have pioneered this country, Native American, indigenous folk. I mean, African Americans are indigenous folk too, and also our Mexican brothers and sisters have been victims of lynchings throughout the history, the torrid history of the United States. So this little media digital feed that I'm about to speak over and show just kind of like catalogs some of the media and pieces that I've been following and reading, and how I kind of got to a space of discovering some things that have helped empower and move forward. So I read this post by Rachel Elizabeth Cargill, and it says, "When is the last time you saw the brutal murder of a white body passed around on social media?" And she shows a picture of a lynch mob. And I really liked her post. Not that there's much to like about this, but I'll show you how it kind of led to some other things. So it says, "For the last 24 hours, I've been called relentlessly to view the brutal murder of a body that looks like mine. Tags and posts, emails forwarded to me, DMs and texts asking, have you seen it? I had the limited capacity yesterday pour into funding therapy for Black women and girls, all while protecting my heart at all costs from spiraling into the grief that comes from seeing yet again one of those videos. Another hashtag, be born out of white supremacy and Black disposability. Black men and women on my timeline, I want to tell you, be gentle with yourself. You don't have to watch another round of public lynchings. You don't have to participate in the circus of retweets, regrams, and unfiltered displays of traumatizing footage. Trauma porn, social media devours it. There is often the argument, but we need to share and let people know. But I beg you to tell me at this point, white supremacy and violence against Black bodies at the hands of whiteness is not unknown. There is no new information America must process to have full evidence of the real and true hunting of Black bodies that is happening and had happened for generations. Is just one more dead Black boy recorded, gone viral, going to be when they start to care? And Black death as a form of entertainment for white America is in no way a new concept in America, to America. In the second photo, you'll see a photo from 1877 spectacle lynching or lynching picnic. Families would lay out blankets and prepared meals, and men would dress up and joke a rough house before the public lynching took place, and photo opportunities followed. And yet we are expected to demand our justice peacefully. And this really struck me, and I think that Rachel does a fantastic job of articulating the fact that we require care, and that our demographic and our people and our bodies, and if you want to be a friend and an ally to African American descendants of chattel slavery right now, you can consider, be considerate and think about this spectacle, and like using the internet and how the internet creates a distance from racism, and it's actually a weapon and a mechanization of purporting trauma and racial images because of the accessibility of it. And that technology is created by I won't say it's created by white men, but the people that power these machines and these things have created a really toxic landscape and conduct and habits that don't necessarily serve. They perpetuate things from a distance, and they perpetuate these activities and of spectaclism, if that's even a word. So I don't know, I started thinking, right, and I came across Smart News, and this map shows over a century of documented lynchings in the United States. And before I got there, I started to think about lynching, right? And I started to think about empowering. How do I heal myself from this? How do I get out of this space of defeat, feeling defeated and feeling sadness in witnessing another public lynching and just continual lynchings, and just thought about witnessing and using media literacy and reclaiming media as a form of reparations. And, coming across Smart News and this map showing a century of documented lynchings in the United States, there is an interactive map and a website created by a group called Monroe Work Today, which takes its name from a sociologist in the early 20th century named Monroe Nathan Work, who spent decades compiling data and statistics on lynchings. Plaintalkhistory.com is a fantastic resource. I went through this, and it really helped me to kind of put into perspective the vastness of this. I think that educating ourselves and going through history and reworking history and becoming knowledged is a really fantastic form of therapy, and empowerment, because you see here you can really go through. And also I would suggest, if you are white passing, specifically, especially white or white passing, for you to go through these resources as well. And, there's strict definitions and broader definitions, correct? A broader definition actually just kind of, blankets and shows that, there is a discounting of what a lynching is defined as, because a lynching is supposed to be defined as a noose around one's neck when it's not, right? So here you can decide what to map. You can decide if you think it's murdering at random is not the same as lynching, and I would count both kinds of violence as lynching. And I you can click on this resource. You can see here the history. Everything in orange is African American, a descendant of chattel slavery, black identifying bodies that have been lynched. Yellow markers, Latinx folks. Red is Chinese people who've been lynched or have had their homes or businesses burned. And and purple is indigenous. I mean, this is a complete minimization of what's happened to our native indigenous ancestors, but you can go through this. You can see these different cases. You can go over here to part 2. You can see that you are presented with this information and questions and biases that you can do and engage in order to not only critically think about this source, but also critically think about trusting resources. And I love that Plain Talk History went through this, because a lot of times we need to do more work about the information and data that we take in that is real, and they do prove and have backing into why where these factoids come from, and that they're not complete. And this map dates to 2011. White people were lynched as well that defended or fought against a public lynching of a person of color. So there were abolitionists that were murdered too, but for the most part this highlights the fact of the demographic and bodies and whatnot. And extra resources that they point to is a discussion, correct? And how to discuss your investigation, because essentially what you're doing when you're going back into history and you're empowering yourself and going back into history, which is what I highly implore people to do, is that you can go and in this is, I'm tapping students of color because I'm a person of color, and it's showing some prompts that are very helpful. You can, what to do when information is enraging. Take a break offline. It is okay for you to unplug. I love that Plain Talk History points this out. Look more closely at the heroes. So I want to dig into this prompt. You can engage online with more positive aspects of history because every generation in the past has also had brave heroes. You can choose anyone unfamiliar to you among the heroes in 1920 and search online for photos, a documentary, a podcast about them. For example, Google here for Jovita Adar. You can see the story of how she stood down the Texas Rangers, hunting the University of Chicago's digital repository of Ida B. Wells to find a photo of her at age 55 and investigate how she continued fighting. And so what I love about this is that, and this is what Sisters with M Voices is really championing to prompt, is to remember the Black femmes of the past that have been on the front lines, that have been some of the first people to shout out against these atrocities. Ida B. Wells is a Black femme. That is the first person historically to investigate and fight against public lynchings. Ida B. Wells. So what I did, I went and I found, excuse me for my my tabs not being correct, but I found this fantastic video from the Chicago Humanities Festival about Ida B. Wells. And I just want to play this clip, and then I'm going to go back and go over into some other media that is great to, I think, look into right now as a form of healing. But here's a little bit about how Ida B. Wells was overlooked, and this panel featuring her as a fierce investigative journalist that unveiled racist violence and humanized the stories of the victims, and how, this program that is presented by the New York Times and the Chicago Urban League just highlights her work. And so it's something that I haven't gone all the way into. This part alone just had me.
Me too. Wells wrote, "Nobody in this section of the country believes the threadbare old lie that Negro men rape white women." Instead, Wells saw lynching as a violent form of subjugation, an excuse to get rid of Negroes who were acquiring wealth and property and thus keep the race terrorized and the nigger down, she wrote in her journal. Wells was already a 30-year-old newspaper editor living in Memphis when she began her anti-lynching campaign, the work for which she's most famous. After Moss was killed, she set out on a reporting mission, crisscrossing the South over several months as she conducted eyewitness interviews and dug up records on dozens of similar cases. Her goal was to question a stereotype that was often used to justify lynchings, that Black men were rapists. Instead, she found that in 2/3 of mob murders, rape was never an accusation, and she often found evidence of what had actually been a consensual interracial relationship. She published her findings in a series of fiery editorials in the newspaper she co-owned and edited, the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight. The public, it turned out, was starved for her stories and devoured them voraciously. The journalist, mainstream trade
Ida B. Wells
was
media, just a national treasure and was definitely a media pioneer, just on the front lines, doing the Lord's work, truly. And said the things, as Black femmes do, that nobody wants to say, or people are more fearful to say. And so we must honor Ida B. Wells, and I implore you all to go into delve into her work or read her literature and just empower yourself in this moment whenever you're ready to do so. And remember that you are allowed to process what is happening before your eyes in this modern day genocide and murder in the way that you feel best. You know what I mean? So don't feel any pressure. But these resources are here, and there are ways for us to empower ourselves right here on the internet before our fingers. So another fantastic media resource that I found was Always in Season. It's a documentary that is backed by Danny Glover. It is directed by Jacqueline Olive, and you can actually access this on PBS for free. Actually, not for free. You might have to pay $5, but I think that when we're thinking about news and we're thinking about access up to what we we're inundated with a lot of trash media, and we are inundated with a lot of products that are kind of part of like propaganda and falsities. And also I'm triggered a lot by headlines that say, Ahmaud Arbery was killed by 2 white perpetrators. Say their names. Do you know what I mean? Say their names. If we want to, discuss. Sorry, let's do this right now. Let's highlight these murderers' names, right? Let's, Ahmaud Arbery killing, man called 911 to report black male running prior to shooting. I mean, what kind of a fucking shitty headline is that? Excuse my language. But let's just call it what it is. He was murdered by Gregory McMichael, 64 years old, and he was murdered by Travis McMichael. It's on video. These headlines are just traumatizing and triggering. And so that's what I'm speaking to, is that when you, and I'm not trying to trigger anybody in this, but who shot the Georgia black man? You know who shot the Georgia black man. It was a murder. But this is what I'm talking about. Like, is also just even using Google is, I shouldn't even be showing you this on Google, because I should be showing you this on DuckDuckGo. But it's just kind of a convenience thing. So always in season, I signed up for PBS. It was $5. It's $5 a month at the minimum, but you can access actual documentary footage and news and shows and video. And always in season is not available for rent. It's a really great piece of work. So I would suggest everybody is interested to just read into the century of lynching, because this is based on Lennon Lacey, who in August 2014 was found hanging from a swing set. And I think that this invokes and circles back to what Rachel Cargle was saying, that lynchings are not the noose on the neck. This man was it was ruled a suicide, and they speak in this documentary about murder against black bodies in general by white supremacists, white insecurity, which is what white supremacy is. It's nothing but insecurity. It's nothing but a flock of people who are misguided and misleaded, and they shouldn't be mad at black folk. They should be mad at the American government. They should be mad at their ancestors, their white ancestors, for putting them in the position of being lost and needing to find gang culture in white supremacist organizations, like organizing hate. So there's always in season. Examines generational trauma of lynching, sparks discussion across racial lines. This was with Virginia Prescott and Amelia Brock on Georgia Public Broadcasting, a division of NPR. I really love this part that Jacqueline Olive speaks to about the spectacle element of public lynchings, and that, the photographic nature, right? And photographs are nothing more than a mere cousin of video. This video has been viral, and this again, I feel like goes back to what Rachel, I think Cargle did an incredible job of speaking into.
We handle those images and the information directly. People shouldn't be comfortable with stories about lynching and should understand the violence without it being gratuitous. So giving people context and information and new ways to look at the images, for example. So the lead editor, Don Bernier, who was just amazing to collaborate with, he and we both decided that it was important to have a conversation about how spectators showed up in these stories and these narratives. And so not to just focus on the lynching victims, who were, by the way, when they were photographed, it was the final way to strip the last bits of their humanity away. And so I was really conscious of not wanting to re-victimize people in that way and to dehumanize people in that way, but to really start a conversation about how spectators and how lynchers showed up in this narrative, so that we start to focus on how this dehumanization can lead to violence. And to have a conversation about lynching that is evolved and that is elevated. It's much more deep than whether or not people are angry or who's angry and who isn't. everyone has been impacted by this history. When white men, women, and children came out to cheer on the violence, even when they thought it was a great idea, they still had to go home in their quiet moments and acknowledge the fact that they witnessed murder, that they were complicit, that neighbors and people of authority were complicit. And so even when they are not consciously unpacking that, there are things that out of this trauma that are passed along. And so it's really important that we all come together for these conversations and start to really unpack in many ways and in complex ways how this history has affected us and what it looks like today and how it's showing up in institutions today.
My guest is Jacqueline Olive. She's director and producer of the film Always in Season. It's a documentary about lynching in America that won a special jury prize at the 2019 Sundance Film Festival for moral urgency.
Miss Olive said that. She really said that, and just thinking about not only that, like thinking about these people who are conducting these acts of terrorism, right? These white bodies, thinking about not only the spectatorship of that and bringing home that trauma, but the people whose family members are being lynched and are witnessed in the black bodies, and just this really sick soup that it affects all of us, right? And it's very intergenerational, correct? So this is a really great podcast. And, also what I really loved about going back to Plain Talk History is that they have so many resources, and I've copied and pasted quite a few of these in our Google forum. Please know that if you are welcome to join our Google forum. We are migrating from Instagram as a source, as a resource, and just kind of trying to redirect people to our forum. And I'm putting these links that I'm speaking to into that forum so you can access a lot of this. But what I really loved and how I want to end this is that, if you are a person, a white person, white passing person, anybody, like all of us as black bodies, as brown bodies, as people, if you are a spectator to this, and you want to call yourself an accomplice, if you date or have friendships and relationships with African American folk, if your co-workers are African American descendants of chattel slavery, if you are in proximity to any racial group that is found to be dealing with violence, especially if you are in an interracial relationship, interracial friendships, because a lot of this actually, according to Miss Ida B. Wells, is formulated from this misconception that black men were rapists and that lynching is a response to the rape of white women. But in actuality, lynching is a response to the economic threat and was used as a tactic to rob black folks of land rights and property. And it's really a lot of it is tied to capitalism. I mean, even Ahmaud's murder was tied to a supposed robbery attempt. So the education is out there. If you care, you will do the work, the labor yourself, and go out and educate yourself. Because if I can find it, you can. That's the bottom line. There's no excuse, and then we really don't have the space as a people to sit and do the labor of educating all of you. So go do the work, because it's right here on the internet. So one last resource that I want to show you is that I really love that Plain Talk History put in this Speak Up, responding to bigotry, everyday bigotry worksheet dated back January 2015. This is 5 years old. And if a lot of you are looking for ways to deal with, especially white passing people, to these kinds of situations happening, whether it's like your own bias, workplace humor, quote unquote, parental attitudes, sibling slurs, joking in-laws, everyday bigotry, corporate policies, retail racism, racial profiling, come, check out this website and do some reading. There's a PDF you can download. If you, also people of color, you can send this to people who ask if you want to. You don't even have to do that. But you know what? This is here if you want to just, somebody wants to say something, you can just swing this over that way. Sorry about that. But it's here. You know, resources are here, and there's reading that can be done in order to empower all of us and help all of us to move forward, right? Because we're just inundated with this media. We're inundated with these stories, and it's really frustrating. It's really frustrating. But what I will say is that reading about Ida B. Wells, reading about, just looking into the history of her voice, and just look at her, look at her photo if you don't have it in you. You know what I mean? We can really, like this, look at the different ways we can, honor and make her your desktop, make her your cell phone picture, whatever you have to do to make you feel better. It's out there. So thank you. Please feel free to join the Sisters with Invoices Google Forum. It is a fantastic resource. We need you to put your resources in here. This is a safe space. It's you can add requests to join. And this is a mutual aid forum, and this is, a way of reclaiming media as a form of reparations, and this is us feeding links and various resources that we can all access, like blackpast.org actually is another fantastic resource that I've posted in here, and it's dedicated to providing reliable and accurate information on the history of African America. You can go to blackpast.org. It's out there, y'all. So anyways, just know that take care of yourself. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. You're allowed to check out, and that none of this is deserved. None of this is deserved. So how we honor ourselves and how we empower ourselves is that we look at the past, because in the words of my father, his story is his story, not her story, not our story. It's the story of the colonizers, the story of capitalism. And we've gone from lynchings being a thing of white males and whiteness being threatened by sexual relations between black men and white women, to it being about capitalism, to be it allowing modern day lynchings to happen because because these men thought that this man had stolen some physical property from him. So you can murder for physical things. You can commit murder and get away with it, physical things. And that's what lynchings do. And yeah, I don't really care if people know about my business. But let's look here to end this. How does history affect your life? This is from plaintalkhistory.com. The amazing and frightening part of history is that it never goes away. It changed the world we live in now. Thousands of stories built the culture that became part of us. The heroes you met on these pages demonstrate that history is not just about famous leaders at the top who all get the credit. Likewise, the things you do today behind the scenes will be historical too, right? And so just again, going back to this, white people can say something when you hear the echoes of white supremacy or prejudice. And the biggest problem in Monroe and Florence's work era is the same one as today. People who are good often stay quiet even when something very unjust is happening. It's always easier to avoid risking a conflict over ideas, which is why so many people do that. It is easier. But when something is important to your principles, it is time to stand up. If you hear another student or teacher or coworker using stereotypes to describe a whole race of people, tell them that you don't agree. There are ways to focus on what they said without criticizing them personally. And then it leads into the link, and then the final paragraph. If an act of hatred or vandalism occurs in your community, the Southern Poverty Law Center has a thorough guide and inspiration to help, 10 ways to fight hate, and it starts with a similar principle. Do something in the face of hatred. Apathy will be interpreted as acceptance. Apathy will be interpreted as acceptance. So remember that. Remember that apathy will be interpreted as acceptance, and that your apathy will be interpreted by your black and brown counterparts, by your friends and your coworkers, that you accept lynching and you accept racism. then you accept bigotry. So think about that, and I want to thank you all for listening to this word, and take care of yourselves.